Because she's never been the president, and so if we are trying to find a metric by which to predict her leadership capabilities, the people who are working with her every day, I think, is a worthwhile metric to explore.
Do you even know the responsibilities that the office of the vice presidency has? Why would we compare the people that are working as staffers as part of that small office, as part of the executive branch, to the cabinet, the top level people for your offices and departments?
If she can't bring people on to like stay with her and like write policy and little debate quips or whatever, I don't think that she would be able to keep people on in a cabinet, let alone anybody of quality who would actually do things that benefit us as opposed to what they have done, which is make us poorer, less safe, and more of a playground for the rest of the world, which is like literally what has happened and which you have not addressed.
So if Donald Trump can't maintain his personal relationships with lawyers or his staff, and he's losing all of his businesses, and he wasn't able to maintain his cabinet, what faith do we have that Donald Trump can hold on to cabinet members of the future?
Give you a chance to respond, John, and then we got to go to the next question.
Because I am aware of what is happening mechanically with Trump's next administration, and that inspires confidence.
It's a non-answer. It doesn't mean anything.
We'll go to the next question.
John, I wanted to confirm before I ask, are you Catholic?
Yes.
So you talk a lot about assimilation. People from the wrong countries can't really come here to assimilate into our culture.
Sure.
But Catholics were widely rejected for a long time, so I was wondering how you kind of justify those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Catholic. I believe in Catholic theology, but I don't necessarily mean or think that that means that we have to open the world to anybody who's Catholic. I mean, Haiti, for example, I keep mentioning, is 52% Catholic. That's more than twice as Catholic as America is. I think that the biggest challenge to Christian anthropology is that a lot of people who claim to be Christians or to be Catholics are not viewing that in the same way that European Christians view it. And so I don't think it's enough to say these people can come into the country because they are Catholic, like a lot of people in Latin America, for example, because if you look at how they vote, how they express their religious values politically, they are still voting overwhelmingly for Democrats, which are a party that literally celebrates a repudiation of those values. I mean, at the DNC, they had a truck that was giving out circumcisions and like birth control and all sorts of things like that, which if you're a Catholic, I mean, you cannot support that in any capacity. But for some reason, these demographics which are coming here from these countries which are supposedly so Catholic are more in alignment with the Democrat Party than they are with the Republican Party. I think it's something like 51% of white Catholics are supporting Trump, 61% of Hispanic Catholics are supporting Harris. Someone's wrong there. Someone is directionally incorrect there. And so I don't view it to say, you know, you can't come into the country because it's just, I see it for what it is. It's not necessarily a religious thing, I don't think. It's more of how that actually manifests with what we see and what's going on. And I think there have been plenty of popes and saints who have expressed similar sentiments to my own.
Wait, hold on. If Catholicism is the important part here, wouldn't the Pope being pro-immigrant, the Pope who's made statements saying that we need to accept migrants more, wouldn't this be something as a Catholic that's probably the most important thing for you to accept in your life as well?
No, I mean, if you want me to Pope-splain, we can Pope-splain, but I don't think that's true.
Okay, that's fine if you want to Pope-splain.
Because he's made statements,
Catholic, right? Because the Pope is the head of the Catholic Church, and if you want to betray or if you want to fight against any statements on morality or faith, of which the Pope in the Catholic teachings has infallibility when he speaks on matters of faith, right? You know this, yes, of faith or morality.
Yes, the Pope
how could you possibly call yourself a Catholic?
Because the Pope will say one day that we should, not turn away the poor and we should take care of them. Then he will say other days, countries can have borders, they can enforce immigration policies. It simply depends on which statement of his you want to take, depending upon which day. So I don't think that my view on immigration is misaligned with the church teaching or the teaching from Pope Francis.
That's pretty heretical to me. I don't know.
I was more concerned with like Catholics that are already here renouncing their faith to become more like Protestant America that was founded. You talked about going back to America's roots.
Yeah.
So renouncing Catholics that are already here, renouncing their faith.
I don't renounce Catholics who are here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks guys for deciding to hold this debate at the very best of the Big Ten campuses. My question is addressed to both of you. Given the significant conflicts happening across the globe, foreign policy wonks are worried that China is going to inevitably invade Taiwan. And if this does end up happening, what makes your respective candidates best equipped to handle this conflict?
I would first. I thought that we were going to segue on. Tell me what to do.
Who's going first?
We'll start with John.
Okay. I simply don't think that if Trump is in office, that's a threat that is existing to the extent that it does now when Biden's in office. I think that there have been foreign policy failures under the Biden administration, which essentially put up a flag letting other countries know that we are in a state of relative weakness and they can act more in accordance with their interests because they don't have to worry about America stepping up to the plate to defend their allies the way that they would under a Trump administration, for example. I mean, you look at what's going on in Israel, look at what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. I mean, you could see something maybe pop off, probably not within this timeline because we're like, what, a month month out from the election. But I don't think that China would try to do something like that under a Trump presidency. I just simply don't.
I mean, if you look at the foreign policy disposition of this country right now, I think that somebody like Donald Trump is your greatest hope if you're China. Donald Trump has no ability to mobilize the United States to have any kind of coherent foreign policy vision, because I think Donald Trump lacks an overall vision for America. I think when you look at the broad picture between Harris and Trump, and I will speak of it abstractly, since that's the only thing the conservative has done in this debate, on an abstract level, the problem with Trump is that he doesn't really have a vision for the United States because he has no understanding of history, he has no understanding of geopolitics, he has no understanding of the larger structures at play, meaning he doesn't know why America is the foreign policy leader, or where American hegemonic dominance comes from. He doesn't know what NATO is or what it's for. He thinks there's probably a NATO army that everybody pays money towards that America was getting ripped off for. That's the extent he knows about it. And Donald Trump doesn't see where America fits in internationally into the world order, that America should be maintaining peace and stability across especially Europe, if not other parts of the world. So when Donald Trump comes into office, we get these empty platitudes again, like, oh, well, under Donald Trump, these things would never happen. Which things? Because Bashar al-Assad continued to gas his citizens. That's why Trump bombed the airport. Iran attacked Saudi Arabia. That's why Trump went after Soleimani. Russia remained in Crimea. They didn't retreat at all there. They continued to fund the civil war in the Donbass. So this idea that people wouldn't do things under Donald Trump is just nonsense. It just shows that you either don't know history, you don't know the history of 2016 to 2020, or you're more likely you're being malicious and you're just lying and trying to present something in a disingenuous way to try to run away from all of Trump's failures. I would much rather have somebody with a coherent vision for where America sits at in the world, and I think everybody else would fear and respect this more, rather than Donald Trump that comes off like a schizophrenic chihuahua who is only nice to people that pet him last.
Thank you.
So my question is for Stephen and maybe John as well, because I hope he'd be against foreign interference. Given recent controversy around certain figures on the right, like Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, and possibly more to soon be uncovered, receiving Russian money for their coverage, I wanted to ask, are there any reforms you would support to stem anti-American influence, foreign or otherwise?
So I'll go from less extreme to more extreme. I think the least extreme that I think should be proposed to Congress, that I think people should genuinely support, is if you are any major media player, whether you're alternative media or mainstream media, you should have to disclose who your funding sources are from. Whether that means to the federal government or some third-party organization, or even publicly, I don't know what that looks like, but there has to be some sort of disclosure going on, I think. I think that's number one. For a more extreme version, I think that any large social media account that is reporting on or commentating on domestic politics in the United States, that account should be unmasked. Or at the very least, we should know the nationality of that account. I think that every single American citizen has a compelling interest to know. I think it would be very interesting to see if, say, the top 10 Democrat accounts, you found out that 9 of them were Chinese, or if the top 10 conservative media accounts, you found out that 9 of them were Russian. I think that people would want to know that. I think it would benefit all of us, and I think it would do a greater service to the concept of freedom of speech and open discourse and open dialogue, rather than having a bunch of people operating under these anonymous masks, taking money from foreign dictators, and trying to screw with our media environment in order to push forth, essentially the destruction of this country.
I would agree with a lot of that. I would not agree with any measure that seeks to reduce the availability of anonymous accounts to people on the internet. I think that Twitter is the only place where free speech really exists right now on the internet, and there's certainly a lot of very, very influential Twitter accounts who've done a lot to move the conversation politically, especially on the right. And so I would not support any measure that seeks to unmask them, because these people have jobs and families, and as we've seen, when they dox people, they arrest them for memes such as Ricky Vaughn. You have instances where these things can get pretty ugly pretty quickly. So I wouldn't support that. I also would maybe just add an asterisk. I don't really like the idea of thinking that foreign money in politics is like the worst thing ever. Not because I support foreign money in politics, but because I don't want people to become under the impression that that is the problem in itself. That there's not a lot of American money that funnels through this country, which is not itself problematic and acting against the interests of American people, because there's plenty of that. So I don't think it's enough to say foreign money is bad. You have to sort of, I think, go a little bit further and say any money that acts against the interests of the American people is bad and should be punished.
If you're opposed to the doxing, does that mean you disavow Libs of TikTok? Because that's an account that frequently and regularly doxes people that have political views that they disagree with?
Libs of TikTok? If I disavow them? No, I don't disavow them.
Okay, so then you don't care about doxing. That was a total lie.
No, they dox.
When you say that X is an open platform for freedom of speech, what do you feel about the J.D. Vance dossier that has been stripped from
the one that had a social
without
security
a
number.
legal name.
And I don't support disavowing libs of TikTok because they dox evil people who are going after exactly the kind of people who I'm speaking about. So it's a completely different
There's that
thing.
good fascist authoritarian speech. That's what I like. As long as they're evil people, there are no bad tactics, only bad targets.
Yes, these are people who want to mutilate the genitals of children. These are bad people. They have to go.
Check one. Let's see. We'll just have to speak. There it goes. Okay. Do you have a quick rebuttal?
No, I think both answers spoke for themselves.
Thank you very much. And then this is actually going to be our last question that we can take.
Hi, I have a question for John Doyle. Previously stated that many immigrants that came out from 1960 were from countries who are culturally incompatible with the United States. Both my roommates in Penn State are actually first-generation immigrants, one of which was from Trinidad and Tobago, the other which is from Nigeria, who was actually personally subject to the Trump Muslim ban in 2016. Both of these men are graduating in the springtime and will be serving in the U.S. Army after they finish their ROTC vows. So these two Americans, because they're both American citizens, are they any less American than you, John Doyle, despite their vow to fight and die for this country?
Well, it's a great question. I think I would first say that we don't make policy based on the exception. We should make it, when we do make it, based on what tends to happen. And your friends are obviously exceptions, but if we let in, say, 1 million people from their respective countries of origin, you would not see that same result. And so I don't think it's a question of whether or not they are just as American as I am, because if they're expressing similar sentiments, I mean, for all intents and purposes, the way that you would, I guess, measure our patriotism or something would more or less be equal. The problem is, when you open up the gates to people from those countries, you don't see the same thing. So am I more American than your friends because they just got here and my ancestors have been here since 1701? I could see an argument for that, but I'm a nice guy, so I like to be inclusive. However, since they're willing to, sacrifice for this country, maybe we would make an exception. But again, we don't like to make exceptions. We want to go based on what tends to happen. And what tends to happen is that when you allow for demographics who are coming from countries that are more alien to the United States, they tend to express their political sentiment in ways which are disadvantageous to Native Americans, to people who built this country, and I can't support that as a patriot.
Is there a single white European country whose immigrants vote conservatively?
Repeat that?
Is there a single white European country whose immigrants come over here and vote for conservatives? Just one?
Not by majority, but if you still look at...
So that means that you would be opposed to all immigrants?
Sure. I'm saying that, like I said,
Okay.
like I said earlier, if you're looking at data of
immigrant... What you said earlier was you don't want anybody coming over. You don't want to talk about the exception. You want to talk about the rule. And the rule is what we have to look at what people do in the aggregate, and statistically speaking, because you keep making this like white person reference, which is by the way, a very American I don't know what you'd say, race thing to do for people that don't have clear ancestry because they're just American, is you have this weird fascination with white Europeans, like they would come over here and vote conservatives. I know a lot of people from France, from Sweden, from Norway. You think these people come to the United States? These are the whitest motherfuckers in the world. Do you think these people are coming to the United States and voting for Trump? No, and you just admitted it. So you would ban all immigrants because there's no immigrant group, except for Cubans, I guess, unfortunately for you, I guess, that actually come over here and vote for the horrible party that you're a part of. So why not just say I want to ban all immigration?
Right. I mean, as I've said tonight, and as I've said for 5 years, I don't support immigration. I want an immigration moratorium. When we're talking about historical immigration trends, the demographics which have become more assimilated in the sense that they express their political desires by voting for the party which wants to conserve America are groups that have deeper roots in this country. Germans, Scots-Irish, groups like that, WASPs. These are groups which express what they want the future to look like by aligning themselves more in accordance with the party which seeks to conserve it. And these other groups which, they come to America in 2024 as a Nord. I don't expect them necessarily to hop on the Trump train, but if you're talking about historical immigration patterns, that is definitely true.
I can give you a quick rebuttal.
How can you say, I don't understand how you can say when you conserve America, when you want to go back to other times that you're just arbitrarily choosing. Like when you say, for instance, you say, well, the Irish have a deep history in America. Irish and Italians, when they came over through Ellis Island, didn't have as deep of a history in the United States. In fact, they formed a lot of ghettos and they formed a lot of in-groups, and a lot of people that were native in the United States didn't like those people either. So where are you drawing the line at when you talk about conserving America?
I want to give John a response, and then I'll go to the next question.
Irish and Italians have assimilated into this country. The only thing that would differentiate them would be maybe a St. Patrick's Day celebration or a pasta night, but if you look at how they manifest themselves, they are more or less assimilated without meaningful difference. Other groups don't exactly express that, even if they've been here for 2 or 3 generations, like you see with Chinamen. So,
All right,
Wait,
I'm
can
going
I
to
ask
give you
one
a
more
quick.
question?
I hate
who
to
do
do
you
this,
think had a more
Stephen.
extensive? Well, just one quick
Stephen,
question for him. Who do you
if
think had a
it's-
more extensive operation in the United States, MS-13 or the Mafia?
What was it? Who has more roots in the United States?
Who had a more extensive criminal enterprise operation in the United States, MS-13 or the Mafia?
And the Mafia existed a long time. MS-13 has only been a problem in this country for the last 10, 15, 20 years. So I don't think that you can equate that, especially if we're talking about a 2024 presidential election.
I want to give you a quick rebuttal.
All right, I just want to say that I'm from Erie County. It's a county known for having a high asylum seeker population. For example, my grandparents lived next to Syrian refugees who were personally tortured by the Assad regime. And when I speak to these people who've immigrated to America and they sing its praises, they have personally made me more prouder to be American than you have, John Doyle.
Do want to remind you folks, we are looking for questions rather than, we're looking for questions more than statements. Next gentleman.
Hello. Oh, that guy's really proud of himself. I'd just like to say, I'd like to ask a question to specifically John Doyle first. So I heard you say something about, theater-occupied government earlier.
True.
Could you maybe elaborate on that?
It's just there's a joke on the internet, and it's just a joke. It's obviously not real, where people throw around this term ZOG, Zionist-occupied government, which is a way of describing the way our government functions. I amended that to theater kid-occupied government because I think it's a more accurate way of sort of assessing the type of person who works in government, who works in D.C. And I think that's true. I think I can stand by that. It's essentially to say the type of person who gets involved in politics nowadays, working in D.C. as a staffer, as a policymaker, or whatever, these tend to be people who are very sort of interested in whatever status working in D.C. can offer to them. They themselves are not necessarily exceptional and accomplished. These are people who strive to become policymakers, to work in D.C. They will starve them. I mean, if anyone here knows people working in D.C. with these kinds of jobs, they're not making very much money, they don't eat very well, and they're pretty much miserable, very anxious all the time, but they enjoy working in D.C. because they like being able to go back and report something home for Thanksgiving. And so I think that that is a focus of getting involved in politics that is not necessarily to make meaningful change, but rather because they simply enjoy the feeling that it brings them. Sort of like someone who is performing like a theater kid, for example, and you look to and they make their little TikToks and they're dancing around. It reminds one of the experience in high school that maybe we have had with theater kids. And so I sort of saw it and could not unsee it. And I still think that that's a pretty accurate way to describe those kinds of people.
Yeah, so you're basically describing like a government full of like SGA kids, pretty much.
SGA kids?
Yeah, like Student Government Association.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are the kids, they wear the suits to school, like the Model UN, debate bro kinds of kids, and it's like people who tend to get involved in politics, I think, to make change will do it because it's the right thing to do, not because they want to LARP and dress up and wear a suit to school and get in debates with their teacher about, nerdy policy things like that. So
Just because we want to squeeze as many more questions, unless you got a rebuttal.
Oh, no. Do I have time to make another question or just like a small one?
I want to move to as many people as possible.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, so when you were up, you were saying things that like describe a great leader, right? And you were talking about things like the ability for Trump to take over the Republican Party, right?
Sure.
And what would make him even better is if he was like able to step on the Democrats and pass things through. Well, despite him having both houses and, like you said, control the Republican Party, he wasn't able to get things done. So then now my question is, right? When you are so willing, right, for him to use authoritarian-like executive actions,
yeah.
And willing to ignore things like 34 felonies and an indictment for January 6th, do you see how it could be like you're in favor of more of a Haitian president than an American president as a resident Haitian?
Are you implying that residents from Haiti are more likely to be criminal than American residents?
Oh, well, if you look at the history of Haiti, I said Haitian president, one who acts like a president but is actually just an authoritarian.
Right. Well, I don't know. I think that people use the word authoritarian to mean something that's like scary. George Bush, Barack Obama, any of these guys could be argued to be authoritarian. Donald Trump using constitutionally permitted actions to advance his legislative agenda, I don't think is necessarily like authoritarian bad guy kinds of behavior. And yeah, I do think that he's fundamentally in a better position to govern as president than he was 4 years ago, because from day one you had Paul Ryan's Congress that was acting to impede everything he did. You had John McCain, who famously withheld his vote so that Obamacare could not be repealed. You had all these remnants of the Republican establishment who would rather act in ways that they supposedly were supposed to not do, that they were professing support of, if it meant kneecapping Donald Trump's success. Now these people are absent. You look at who was not at the RNC: Paul Ryan, Mike Pence, former Speaker McCarthy. These people were absent from the RNC because they understand that this is not a party that is going to house them anymore. This is a party that is becoming slowly but surely a party that can actually reflect the will of its voters. And so, yeah, I have complete confidence in Trump's ability to do that in 2024.
So then I would then ask, would there be any willingness to work with the other side, or do you believe
Sure.
it's just going to be violence? If so, how do you plan to remedy the situation? How do you plan to work with the other side if you don't believe in working with the other side?
I don't think that the issues which we support are actually issues which the other side disagrees with. For example, until Donald Trump, there were a lot of issues that were famously left-wing issues. Things like being anti-war was famously a left-wing issue. Things like protectionism was actually more of a left-wing thing because you had Republicans who wanted total free trade because it was supposed to lower the price of orange juice by 30 cents or something like that. Donald Trump managed to actually realign the party such that now the Republican Party is the party of not wanting to get involved in foreign conflicts, of wanting things like bringing back manufacturing to this country, to this state specifically. And so I don't think that Democrats actually are opposed to this in the way that they think they are. If you look at the issues which tend to pull higher for Democrats for this election, it's more abstract issues, like apparently Republicans are so focused on, issues like democracy, issues like climate change, things like that, which are not, frankly, what people are thinking about when they're at the grocery store. And so I certainly have no intention of not working with the other side. My experience as a Republican, and I think that most Republicans can corroborate this, is that it's actually the opposite, where we are told that if we are not willing to go along with things, if we are not willing to limit ourselves to staying to the left of John McCain, then we are somehow threats to democracy, and we are going to end America, which Donald Trump was in office for 4 years. Everything was more or less fine. So I'm not worried about that. I don't think it would ever be violent.
We'll jump to the next one.
Wait, am I allowed to answer part of the question?
No.
First of all,
My name is John, and I have a question for Stephen. It's the really only question that should be asked at an event like this, and this is gonna seem like a troll, but it's not. I just can't believe that it's true, so correct me if it's not, that you sat in a room or a corner of a room very much like the one you're sitting in now and just watched many other men plow the ever-living fuck out of your wife. Is that true?
All right, get it. All right, we want to keep it on task. So we're gonna jump to the next.
Do you think for
gentleman.
guys like that, do you think
So-
that they come before they come
all
up and
right.
ask the question, or do you think he's edging himself until he gets it all out?
We're ready for your question.
Sorry. This is a question on behalf of a friend for both of you. In the last couple of months, there have been 2 assassination attempts on Trump with guns. There was a school shooting recently as well, so gun violence issues seem to prop up pretty frequently. Do you guys think there's a gun violence problem in this country? And if so, what policies would you like to see implemented under the administrations you favor?
I absolutely think that's the case. I think that every time you see one of these instances, whether it's assassination attempts or whether they are shootings at schools, mass acts of violence, you notice the FBI always has these people on their radar. And for some reason, there's a failure to execute, making sure that these people are not being able to actually carry out these acts. So I think that there's something odd going on there. And I think that if you actually wanted to solve gun violence, you would have an FBI that is doing its job properly, which it could. It just simply chooses not to follow up on these things for whatever reason. And I think that you would enforce laws in inner cities where virtually all of the gun violence happens in the day-to-day level. I mean, you see these isolated instances where you have individuals going into public places or attempting to assassinate future presidents, and you look at that and you're like, okay, there's a gun violence problem. True, but in terms of the vast majority of it, that is happening in the inner cities between largely gangs who are engaging in different types of warfare amongst themselves, and I think that that needs to be cracked down on if you actually wanted to reduce those numbers meaningfully. Any of the policies that I've seen proposed to stop these isolated lone wolf kinds of incidents more or less don't address, I think, the real problem, which is that for some reason law enforcement understands these people are problems, they are monitoring them, and then for whatever reason nothing is done, and they end up going through and carrying out these acts. And so I think that that's where that's coming from.
No, but I was also curious as to what Destiny would have to say, since he's a liberal gun owner, so I thought that would be an interesting perspective.
I think that guns, I think there are issues with guns insofar as gang violence or certain types of violence in inner cities are concerned, and I think they also expedite people who want to kill themselves. I don't think that they're as big a problem as people make them out to be. I don't like that the Democratic Party makes it a central part of their platform. There are certain types of things that I think I'd be okay with, like possibly more expansive background checks. I think that closing private sale loopholes I think is good. Part of I think what Biden has already done in terms of the private sale loophole stuff, or at least the I think the boyfriend gun loophole or whatever. But guns aren't. They're not. It's not a huge issue for me, and I think it's a big political loser when the party deals with it. It's like abortion for Republicans. I just think it's a really divisive topic. That being said, again, something that was said earlier, I think is funny. When you talk about what an authoritarian is that wants to centralize power in themselves, especially in the executive. There's a reason why we have 3 branches of government. For people that actually give a fuck about this country, I would recommend Federalist Paper number 51. It's a really good explanation, a breakdown of why we have checks and balances, why we have 3 different branches of government, and why you wouldn't want somebody like Donald Trump running the entire thing. And I think it's also strange in terms of how Republicans approach gun violence, or at least how John's laid it out, that we're simultaneously saying things like the FBI was incompetent, they were incapable of following up on anything, they couldn't seem to do their job right, but we also want to increase the power of the FBI and then give them the ability to follow up on everybody and do their job better. It's always like both sides of the mouth, you know, like the GOP is destroying Trump at every step of the way, but Trump is also in control of the GOP and he can do whatever he wants. The swamp is destroying Donald Trump all the time, but next time he's going to hire the right people. The Democrats are, you know, opposed to him, so he can't do anything, but on these issues, they would actually be fundamentally aligned. Like, nothing actually makes sense. There's a reason why at the end of the day, there's no policies listed. There's nothing that's actually talked about in concrete terms. It's all just like fantastic delusion.
We can take one more pithy question, and then we've got to go into the closing statements from our speakers.